In June 1941, Adolf Hitler launched Operation Barbarossa, the largest military invasion in human history. Over 3 million Axis troops poured across the Soviet border, confident of victory within weeks. Hitler believed the USSR was a rotten structure that would collapse the moment the door was kicked in. He was catastrophically wrong. The Wehrmacht advanced with terrifying speed at first, encircling entire Soviet armies and capturing hundreds of thousands of prisoners. But the vast distances of Russia, the brutal winter of 1941, and the sheer resilience of the Red Army stalled the German war machine just short of Moscow. Soviet General Georgy Zhukov launched a counteroffensive in December 1941, pushing German forces back and shattering the myth of Wehrmacht invincibility. This was the first sign that the campaign in the East was not the swift victory Hitler had promised his generals. Germany now found itself trapped in a war of attrition against an enemy with far greater manpower, industrial capacity, and territory to trade for time. By 1942, Hitler shifted his focus south, aiming to seize the oil fields of the Caucasus and cut off Soviet supply lines along the Volga River. This led to the Battle of Stalingrad, one of the bloodiest confrontations in military history. German forces became bogged down in brutal urban combat, fighting Soviet defenders building by building, room by room. In November 1942, the Red Army launched Operation Uranus, encircling the entire German Sixth Army inside the city. Hitler refused to allow a retreat, insisting his forces hold their ground at all costs. Cut off from supplies, starving and freezing in temperatures far below zero, the trapped German troops suffered horrific losses. By February 1943, the remnants of the Sixth Army surrendered. Roughly 91,000 German soldiers were taken prisoner. Very few would ever return home. Stalingrad was more than a military defeat. It shattered German morale, destroyed an entire army, and proved that the Soviet Union could not only survive Germany's onslaught, but reverse it. From this point forward, the strategic initiative on the Eastern Front belonged to the Red Army. In July 1943, Germany attempted one final major offensive at Kursk, hoping to encircle Soviet forces in a massive pincer movement and regain the initiative. The Soviets, however, had anticipated the attack and built deep, layered defenses with minefields, anti-tank guns, and reserve armies waiting behind the front lines. What followed was the largest tank battle in history. German panzer divisions, including new Tiger and Panther tanks, clashed with Soviet armor across open steppe. Despite early gains, the German offensive stalled against the sheer depth of Soviet defenses. When Hitler diverted resources to deal with the Allied invasion of Sicily, the attack was called off entirely. Kursk marked the last time Germany would attempt a strategic offensive in the East. From that moment on, the Wehrmacht was permanently on the defensive, reacting to Soviet moves rather than dictating the pace of the war. Following Kursk, the Red Army launched a series of relentless offensives that pushed German forces steadily westward. Cities once captured by the Wehrmacht, Kharkov, Kiev, Smolensk, were retaken one by one. Soviet industrial output, bolstered by factories relocated beyond the Ural Mountains, now vastly outpaced Germany's ability to replace lost tanks, aircraft, and soldiers. In June 1944, the Soviets launched Operation Bagration, a massive offensive that annihilated Germany's Army Group Center. Coordinated to coincide with the Allied landings at Normandy, Bagration destroyed roughly 30 German divisions and opened the road toward Poland and eventually Germany itself. It remains one of the most devastating defeats in German military history, arguably worse than Stalingrad in scale. By this point, Germany was fighting a two-front war it could not sustain. Fuel shortages crippled the Luftwaffe, manpower reserves were exhausted, and entire units were being filled with poorly trained conscripts, including teenagers and elderly reservists. Through late 1944 and into 1945, Soviet forces surged through Poland, East Prussia, and into the heart of Germany itself. Cities were reduced to rubble as retreating German forces fought desperate, often suicidal, delaying actions. Civilians fled westward in terror, aware of the brutal reprisals many feared from advancing Soviet troops after years of atrocities committed by German forces on Soviet soil. In April 1945, Soviet forces encircled Berlin. What remained of German resistance in the capital consisted of exhausted regular troops, Volkssturm militia, and Hitler Youth conscripts, armed with little more than desperation. After brutal street-to-street fighting, Adolf Hitler took his own life in his underground bunker on April 30, 1945. Berlin surrendered days later, and Germany's unconditional surrender followed on May 8, 1945. The Eastern Front consumed the majority of Germany's military strength throughout the war. Historians estimate that roughly 80% of all German military casualties occurred fighting the Soviet Union. The invasion that Hitler believed would be won in a matter of months instead became a 4-year catastrophe that bled the Wehrmacht dry and paved the way for total defeat. The Soviet Union paid an almost unimaginable price for its victory, with estimates of over 26 million Soviet deaths, both military and civilian. Yet it was ultimately Soviet resilience, industrial capacity, and manpower that broke the back of Nazi Germany's war machine. Germany's failed offensive in the East stands as one of history's clearest examples of strategic overreach, a campaign built on the assumption of a quick victory that instead became the very battlefield where the Third Reich met its downfall.